Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a pretty wild story, how a major world power basically got locked out of the tiny chips that, run pretty much everything in the modern world. It's a huge deal, and it really changes things for their future.
All right, let's jump right in. The best way to see what's happening is to look at the most dramatic part of this crisis. It's like watching a technological implosion in real time.
So when the sanctions hit, Russia was pretty much completely cut off from the world's supply of semiconductors. I mean, just look at that number, a 90% drop. That's not just a dip, that's the tap being turned completely off. You're talking about being severed from the lifeblood of all modern technology.
And that created a situation that is, it's pretty desperate. How desperate? We're talking reports of the military literally tearing apart dishwashers and refrigerators just to scavenge the chips inside to repair their equipment. Just picture that. It's a shocking image of technology going backwards.
So all of this begs a huge question, right? This is a country that put the first satellite in space, a nation known for its military engineering. So how on earth did it end up in a spot where it's so incredibly dependent on other countries for this basic critical tech? Okay, to really get how this happened, we've got to rewind a bit. This isn't just about something that happened yesterday. The roots of this crisis go way back, through a long history of Soviet ambition and then post-Soviet collapse.
Right, so this dependency wasn't a sudden thing. Back in the 60s, the USSR was right there, keeping up with the West in microelectronics. But then, they started to fall behind. By the 1990s, their domestic industry had pretty much crumbled, so Russia shifted to a new strategy, one that a lot of countries use. They design their own chips at home, but then send the designs overseas to be manufactured in these super advanced factories called fabs.
And this is where you can see the massive vulnerability, the Achilles heel. They had the brains to design their own high-tech chips like their flagship Elbrus CPU, but they just couldn't physically make them at a modern level. For that, they were almost totally reliant on one single company, halfway across the world in Taiwan, TSMC. That reliance on one key partner, it's a classic single point of failure. And in February 2022, that weakness was, it was brutally exploited.
Suddenly, you had this massive coalition, the US, the EU, Japan, South Korea, all slamming the door shut. And this wasn't just, hey, you can't buy our chips anymore. No, this was a total technological blockade. They cut off the finished chips, sure, but also the machines that make the chips, and even the super specialized software you need to design them in the first place. They cut off the whole ecosystem. And the impact of that, it was immediate and it was drastic. All across Russia's high-tech industries, they were suddenly forced to improvise, to cannibalize, and, honestly, to go backwards.
This right here just perfectly illustrates the problem. Look at their flagship processor, the Elbrus CPU. Before, it was made in Taiwan, using technology from around 2011. Not cutting edge, but modern. After the sanctions, they had to move production back home to a Russian factory. And the best they could do was technology from 2004? That's like jumping in a time machine and going back more than 15 years, a massive technological step down.
And this wasn't just affecting supercomputers and military gear. Regular people felt it almost right away. You had Russia's biggest car companies suddenly selling brand new cars without airbags or anti-lock brakes. Why? Because they just couldn't get the electronic parts. Basic safety features we all take for granted were just gone.
The situation got so bad that even top officials couldn't spin it. The CEO of the state's huge defense tech company basically came out and said it publicly. Trying to replace everything and become self-sufficient, it's a fantasy. He called it, and this is a quote, senseless, economically impractical, and simply impossible. Okay, so with the door to the West completely slammed shut, where do you go? Russia turned to the only major player left on the board that was still willing to do business, hoping they could find some kind of a lifeline.
And what happened next was pretty predictable. Almost overnight, Russia's imports of chips from China more than doubled. China saw this huge vacuum left by Western companies and moved in fast to fill it.
And that shift was just incredibly fast and dramatic. Within just a few months, pretty much all of Russia's chip imports, we're talking 90%, were coming from either China directly or through Hong Kong. That's a huge pivot, going from a global supply chain to relying almost entirely on one single partner.
But, and this is a really big but, this lifeline isn't perfect, not by a long shot. The thing is, while China's tech industry is growing like crazy, it's still not at the absolute cutting edge.
They just can't make the most advanced, high-performance chips that Russia used to get from places like Taiwan.
And there are other problems too. The big Chinese companies are nervous. They don't want to get hit with US sanctions themselves for helping Russia's military too openly. Plus, a lot of the chips they can supply are consumer grade, the kind that goes in your phone, not in a missile. They might not hold up. So what's happened is that Russia has just created a new, and you could argue an even more fragile dependency.
So where does that leave us? Here's the bottom line. Russia managed to avoid a complete and total technological collapse, at least for now. But they did it by trading a whole world of suppliers for just one. So the big question is, in trying to escape dependency on the West, have they just walked into a brand new trap? A reliance on China that could be even more restrictive?